"Thank you for the bread, Mommy Victoria," 7-year-old Emma whispered politely, even though the slice in her small hands was green with mold and hard as stone. She had learned that gratitude kept the punishments away, even when her tiny stomach ached from days of nothing but water and stale crusts. As she tried to bite through the moldy bread, tears streaming down her sunken cheeks, the sound of expensive Italian leather shoes echoed in the hallway. Her father was home early from his business trip, and what he was about to discover would change everything. Before we begin, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts about this story. The massive crystal chandelier in the Blackwood mansion cast dancing shadows across the marble floors, its golden light creating an illusion of warmth that had long since vanished from this house. The 15-bedroom estate in Beverly Hills had once been filled with laughter, the sound of tiny feet running through corridors, and the gentle voice of Isabella Blackwood reading bedtime stories to her daughter Emma. But Isabella had been gone for 8 months now, claimed by a rare heart condition that no amount of money could cure, leaving behind a broken-hearted husband and a little girl who still whispered goodnight to her mother's photograph every evening. Emma Blackwood sat hunched on the cold kitchen floor, her back pressed against the industrial-grade refrigerator that hummed with the promise of food she wasn't allowed to touch. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern design, imported Italian marble countertops, professional Viking appliances, and a wine cellar that held bottles worth more than most people's annual salary. But for Emma, it had become a prison where she was forced to witness abundance while surviving on scraps. Her stepmother, Victoria Ashford Blackwood, had entered their lives 6 months ago like a perfectly orchestrated hurricane. At 34, Victoria possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads in Beverly Hills: platinum blonde hair that cascaded in perfect waves, emerald eyes that could shift from warm to ice cold in seconds, and a figure that looked stunning in the designer red dresses she favored. She had met Emma's father, Alexander Blackwood, at a charity gala, presenting herself as a grieving widow who understood his pain. What Alexander didn't know was that Victoria's previous husband had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving her with a substantial inheritance and a talent for manipulation that would make a con artist jealous. Alexander Blackwood was a man who had built an empire from nothing. At 42, he was the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a tech conglomerate worth $2.8 billion. Forbes had featured him on their cover 3 times, calling him the visionary who changed Silicon Valley. But wealth and success meant nothing when he looked at his daughter's once bright blue eyes, now dulled by a sadness he couldn't understand. Since Isabella's death, Alexander had thrown himself into work with the desperation of a drowning man, taking on projects in Tokyo, London, and Dubai, anything to escape the echo of his wife's laughter in their empty home. Emma pressed the moldy bread to her lips, trying to soften it with her tears before attempting another bite. The green spots on the crust made her stomach turn, but she had learned that refusing food meant going without for days. Victoria had explained the rules with the sweetness of poison honey. "Ungrateful children who waste food get nothing at all, darling. Your mother would be ashamed of such behavior." The truth was far more sinister than a simple case of strict discipline. Victoria had spent months carefully studying Alexander's routine, learning his schedule, understanding his guilt-driven absence from home. She had discovered the details of Isabella's life insurance policy, the terms of Emma's trust fund, and most importantly, the clause in Alexander's will that left everything to Emma if anything happened to him. Victoria's plan was as methodical as it was cruel: slowly weaken Emma's health and spirit, create evidence of the child being difficult and unstable, then have her declared unfit to inherit. After that, as Alexander's loving wife, Victoria would control the entire Blackwood fortune. The kitchen timer's shrill beeping made Emma flinch, and she quickly shoved the remaining bread into her mouth, forcing herself to swallow the bitter, moldy taste. Victoria had given her exactly 10 minutes to eat, and lateness brought consequences Emma had learned to fear. The red marks on her thin wrists were hidden beneath the long sleeves of her faded pink dress, the same dress she'd worn for weeks because Victoria insisted wasteful children don't deserve new clothes. Emma's reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator showed a ghost of the happy child she'd been 8 months ago. Her blonde curls, once carefully braided by her mother's gentle hands, now hung limp and unwashed. Her cheeks, once round with childhood innocence, had become hollow, making her blue eyes appear enormous in her pale face. At 7 years old, Emma weighed less than most 5-year-olds, but when Victoria took her to their family doctor, she explained it away as grief affecting the child's appetite and going through a picky eating phase. The sound of heels clicking against marble grew louder, and Emma quickly swept the breadcrumbs into her small palm, making sure no evidence remained. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway like a vision from a fashion magazine, her crimson Valentino dress hugging her curves perfectly, diamond earrings catching the light. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never known want, never felt the gnawing emptiness of true hunger. "Well, well," Victoria purred, her voice carrying that dangerous sweetness Emma had learned to recognize. "Did our little princess enjoy her royal feast?" Emma nodded quickly, her hands clasped behind her back to hide the trembling. "Yes, Mommy Victoria. Thank you for taking care of me." Victoria's smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. "Of course, darling. Though I noticed you left some crumbs on the floor." She gestured with one perfectly manicured finger toward a spot where Emma thought she had cleaned everything. What do we say about little girls who make messes? Emma's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "They have to clean it up properly, Mommy Victoria." "That's right. And how do proper young ladies clean floors, Emma?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Emma knew the answer, had performed this humiliating ritual dozens of times before. She sank to her hands and knees, pressing her face close to the marble floor, and began licking up the invisible crumbs with her tongue. The cold, stone against her cheek felt like ice, and the taste of cleaning chemicals mixed with her own tears as she performed the degrading task. Victoria watched with the satisfaction of someone enjoying a private show. "There's a good girl. Your mother would be so proud of how well-mannered you're becoming." The mention of her mother sent a spear through Emma's heart, but she didn't dare respond. Victoria had made it clear that talking back, crying too loudly, or mentioning how things used to be would result in punishments that made moldy bread seem like a luxury. Emma had spent 2 days locked in the wine cellar after asking when her daddy would take her to the park like he used to. As Emma finished her degrading task and sat back on her heels, Victoria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through messages. "Your father is in Singapore this week, closing some tedious business deal. He won't be back until Sunday." She glanced down at Emma with mock sympathy. "I'm afraid that means it's just you and me for the next 4 days. We'll have so much time to work on your character development." Emma's stomach clenched with fear that had nothing to do with hunger. Victoria's character development sessions were elaborate psychological torture disguised as life lessons. She would force Emma to stand in the corner for hours, reciting apologies for imaginary wrongs. She would make Emma write "I am grateful for my new mother" hundreds of times until her small hand cramped. Worst of all, she would show Emma photographs of Isabella and explain in detail how disappointed her real mother would be with Emma's behavior. "Now then," Victoria continued, tucking her phone into her designer purse, "I have some friends coming over this evening for cocktails. You'll be in your room, of course, quiet as a little mouse. I don't want to hear so much as a floorboard creak from upstairs. Can you manage that? Or do I need to help you remember how to be invisible?" Emma nodded vigorously. "I'll be very quiet, Mommy Victoria. You won't even know I'm there." "Excellent. There's a heel of bread in the pantry for your dinner. If you're very good and I don't hear a single sound from you, perhaps tomorrow you'll get something with your water." Victoria turned toward the hallway, then paused. "Oh, and Emma? If anyone asks, you had a lovely grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup for lunch. We wouldn't want people to think I'm not taking proper care of Alexander's precious daughter." The cruel emphasis on precious made Emma's chest tight with unexpressed grief. She had been precious once, to parents who called her their little starlight and promised she would never be alone. Now she felt like a shadow haunting her own home, afraid to speak, afraid to exist too loudly. Victoria's footsteps faded toward the living room, where Emma could hear her making phone calls in the bright, cheerful voice she used when other adults were listening. It was a voice full of warmth and concern, the voice of a devoted stepmother doing her best to help a troubled child through her grief. Emma had heard Victoria use this voice with doctors, teachers, and neighbors, painting herself as a saint and Emma as a difficult child who was struggling to adjust to normal discipline after being spoiled by her real mother. Emma made her way to the pantry, a walk-in space larger than most people's bedrooms, lined with shelves of gourmet food she wasn't allowed to touch. There, on the bottom shelf near the dog food, sat a crust of bread so hard it could have been used as a weapon. She picked it up with both hands, trying not to think about the soft dinner rolls she could smell, the imported chocolates, the fresh fruits that would rot before Victoria would let her have a bite. As she carried her meager dinner toward the servants' stairs, Victoria had forbidden her from using the main staircase. Emma caught a glimpse of herself in the hall mirror. The girl looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-cheeked, with eyes too large for her thin face, wearing clothes that hung like empty sacks on a shrinking frame. She looked like one of the sad children in the charity commercials her father used to donate to, the ones that made him hold her tighter and promise she would always have everything she needed. Emma's bedroom had once been a little girl's paradise. Isabella had decorated it with care: princess wallpaper, a canopy bed with pink silk curtains, shelves lined with books and stuffed animals, and a dollhouse that was a perfect replica of their own home. But Victoria had stripped it all away, claiming it was unhealthy for Emma to cling to childish things. Now the room held only a bare mattress on the floor, a single thin blanket, and Emma's one remaining possession, a photograph of her parents from their wedding day, hidden beneath the mattress where Victoria couldn't find it. Emma sat cross-legged on the mattress, holding the stale bread in her lap like a sacred object. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the last real meal she'd had: pancakes shaped like hearts that her mother had made on a Sunday morning that seemed like a lifetime ago. Isabella had let Emma help mix the batter, and they had laughed when flour ended up in both their hair. Alexander had joined them in his pajamas, declaring it the best breakfast he'd ever had before scooping Emma up in his arms and spinning her around the kitchen. Those memories felt like dreams now, too beautiful to be real. Emma pressed the photograph to her chest and whispered, "Mommy, I'm trying to be brave like you taught me, but I'm so scared, and I miss you so much it feels like there's a hole in my chest. Daddy doesn't see what's happening because he's always gone, and I don't know how to tell him without making Mommy Victoria angrier." The sound of laughter drifted up from the living room as Victoria's guests arrived. Emma recognized some of the voices: wealthy society women who competed over who had the most beautiful home, the most successful husband, the most well-behaved children. She could hear Victoria playing her role perfectly. "Oh, Emma is such a sweet child, but still struggling with her grief, you know. I'm doing my best to provide structure and love, but it's challenging when a child has been indulged for so long." Emma knew that tomorrow, Victoria would have witnesses to back up any story she wanted to tell. These women would remember the devoted stepmother working tirelessly to help a difficult child, never suspecting the truth that was slowly killing Emma from the inside out. As night fell, Emma lay on her thin mattress, listening to the sounds of a dinner party she wasn't allowed to join. She could smell roasted lamb, garlic mashed potatoes, and something sweet baking in the oven. Her stomach cramped with hunger so intense it made her dizzy, but she had learned to embrace the pain as proof that she was still alive, still fighting to survive until her father came home. But Emma didn't know that Alexander's early return from Singapore had been prompted by something that would change everything. His business partner, worried about Alexander's increasing absence from family life, had made an unexpected observation. "Alex, when's the last time you actually saw Emma eat a meal?" When I asked about her at the charity gala, Victoria had to think for several seconds before telling me what Emma's favorite food was. What kind of mother doesn't know that instantly? The question had haunted Alexander during his entire flight home. He realized with growing horror that he couldn't remember the last conversation he'd had with his daughter, the last time he'd seen her laugh, the last time she'd run to hug him when he walked through the door. Grief had made him a ghost in his own home, but tomorrow he was going to start being a father again. Alexander's key turned in the front door at 6:47 a.m., 3 days earlier than Victoria expected. He had taken the red-eye flight from Singapore, driven straight from LAX, and arrived to find his house silent as a tomb. The living room still bore traces of Victoria's dinner party: empty wine glasses, crumpled napkins, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. But something felt wrong in a way he couldn't immediately identify. He climbed the main staircase, intending to surprise Victoria with his early return, but her bedroom door was open and the bed unslept in. Confused, he checked his watch, wondering if she was already up and about. That's when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it, coming from the direction of Emma's room. It was the sound of someone crying, trying desperately to muffle the sobs. Alexander approached his daughter's bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar. What he saw through the crack made him freeze in absolute shock. Emma sat on a bare mattress on the floor, not the beautiful canopy bed he remembered buying for her 5th birthday. She was holding something in her hands, trying to eat it while tears streamed down her face. But it was the sight of his daughter herself that nearly brought him to his knees. She was so thin he could see the outline of her ribs through her dress, her face gaunt and hollow, her hair unwashed and tangled. Alexander pushed the door open wider, stepping into a room that had been stripped of everything that once made it a little girl sanctuary. Gone were the princess decorations, the toys, the bookshelf full of stories Isabella used to read aloud. The walls were bare, the floor empty except for the single mattress and his daughter, who looked up at him with eyes so full of pain and surprise that he felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Emma." His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, what happened to your room? What are you eating?" Emma quickly tried to hide the moldy bread behind her back, her eyes wide with terror. "Daddy, I was just," Mommy Victoria said. She couldn't finish the sentence, too scared of the consequences of telling the truth, too afraid that even her father might punish her for complaining. Alexander knelt down to his daughter's level, fighting to keep his voice calm even though rage was building in his chest like a wildfire. "Emma, baby, show Daddy what you were eating. It's okay, you're not in trouble." With trembling hands, Emma revealed the piece of bread, green with mold and hard as stone. "Mommy Victoria gives me bread every day. She said I should be grateful because some children don't get anything at all." Her voice was so quiet Alexander had to strain to hear her. "I've been very good, Daddy. I promise I've been good." Alexander took the moldy bread from his daughter's hands, staring at it as if it were evidence of a crime, which, he realized, it was. This wasn't discipline or tough love. This was systematic abuse, designed to break his daughter's spirit and possibly her health. "Emma, how long has Victoria been giving you this kind of food?" Emma's lower lip quivered as she tried to remember. "Since you went to the place with the funny name. The place where they make computers." Alexander's blood ran cold. Singapore. She'd been eating moldy bread for the entire week he'd been gone, probably longer. "What about when I'm home, baby? What do you eat then?" "Real food," Emma whispered, "but only a little bit, and Mommy Victoria watches to make sure I don't eat too much. She says greedy children get sick." Emma's voice dropped even lower. "She says Mommy Isabella got sick because she was too greedy for happiness, and if I'm greedy too, I might die and leave you all alone." The calculated cruelty of using Isabella's death to terrorize their daughter sent Alexander's fury to levels he didn't know he was capable of reaching. But he forced himself to stay calm, to be the father Emma needed in this moment rather than the avenging angel his rage demanded he become. "Emma, listen to Daddy very carefully," he said, taking her thin hands in his. "None of this is your fault. You haven't done anything wrong, not one single thing. Mommy Isabella didn't get sick because she was greedy. She had a problem with her heart that no one could fix. And you are never, ever going to be punished for being hungry or wanting food. Do you understand me?" Emma stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. After months of Victoria's psychological manipulation, the concept of eating without punishment seemed impossible to believe. "But Mommy Victoria says..." "Victoria is not your mommy," Alexander interrupted gently but firmly. "She's my wife, but that doesn't give her the right to hurt you. Your real mommy loved you more than anything in the world, and she would never, ever want you to be treated this way." Fresh tears began streaming down Emma's cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear. "I miss her so much, Daddy. I talk to her picture every night, but she doesn't answer. I keep asking her to come back and take care of me, but she never comes." Alexander gathered his daughter into his arms, shocked by how little she weighed, how fragile her small body felt against his chest. "She can't come back, sweetheart, but she's still watching over you. And Daddy is here now. I'm going to take care of you, and I promise no one will ever hurt you like this again." As he held Emma, Alexander's mind was already working, planning his next moves with the same strategic thinking that had built his business empire. He would need evidence, documentation, witnesses. He would need to move carefully to protect Emma from Victoria's retaliation while building a case that would ensure his daughter's safety forever. But first, he would need to get some real food into his daughter and probably medical attention to assess the damage that had been done. "Emma, I want you to stay right here for just a few minutes," he said, setting her gently back on the mattress. "Daddy is going to go downstairs and make you the biggest, most delicious breakfast you've ever had. Then we're going to have a very serious conversation about what's been happening in this house." Emma's eyes filled with hope and terror in equal measure. What if Mommy Victoria gets angry? She said if I ever told you about the bread, she would send me away to a place where bad children live, and I would never see you again. Alexander felt another surge of rage at Victoria's psychological terrorism, but he kept his voice steady. "Victoria will never send you anywhere, because I won't let her. You are my daughter, Emma. You belong with me, and no one, absolutely no one, has the power to take you away from me. Do you believe Daddy?" Emma nodded, though Alexander could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. Months of systematic abuse couldn't be undone with a single conversation, but it was a start. As he made his way downstairs to the kitchen, Alexander pulled out his phone and began making calls. First to his lawyer, then to his doctor, then to a private investigator he'd used for sensitive business matters. By the time Victoria returned from wherever she'd spent the night, Alexander would be ready for war. In the kitchen, Alexander opened the massive refrigerator and stared at shelves packed with gourmet food, imported cheeses, fresh fruits, premium meats, organic vegetables. All of it had been here while his daughter was upstairs eating moldy bread and slowly starving to death. He began pulling out ingredients: eggs, bacon, fresh bread, butter, orange juice, strawberries. He would make Emma the kind of breakfast Isabella used to create on special occasions, the kind that turned their kitchen into a place of warmth and laughter. As he cooked, Alexander's phone buzzed with responses from his calls. His lawyer, Rebecca Martinez, was already drafting emergency custody documents. His family physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, had cleared her morning schedule to examine Emma immediately. The private investigator, a former FBI agent named David Kim, was en route to begin documenting evidence of abuse and neglect. Alexander was flipping golden pancakes when he heard the front door slam shut and Victoria's voice calling out, "Alexander? Darling, what are you doing home early?" Her footsteps clicked across the marble as she approached the kitchen, and Alexander could hear the false surprise in her voice. She knew he was home. She was just buying time to prepare her performance. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway looking flawless despite having spent the night elsewhere. Her crimson dress was wrinkle-free, her makeup perfect, her smile bright and welcoming. What a wonderful surprise. "I was just at an early yoga class with the girls. We are making quite a feast here. Is this for me?" Alexander turned to face his wife, and Victoria must have seen something in his expression that made her smile falter slightly. "Actually, Victoria, this breakfast is for Emma. I went to check on her this morning and found some concerning things." Victoria's recovery was swift and smooth. "Oh, you know how children are when they're going through difficult phases. Emma has been testing boundaries lately, refusing to eat proper meals, being difficult about bedtime, acting out for attention. I've been trying to teach her that actions have consequences, but perhaps I've been too gentle. Sometimes grief makes children manipulative, and I didn't want to be too harsh with Isabella's daughter." The casual way Victoria shifted blame onto Emma and even referenced Isabella made Alexander's jaw clench, but he kept his voice level. "Emma showed me the bread you've been feeding her, Victoria. Moldy bread. Can you explain that?" Victoria blinked once, and Alexander caught a flash of calculation in her eyes before the concerned stepmother mask slipped back into place. "Oh dear, is that what she told you? Alexander, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Emma has been having some issues with truthfulness lately. Yesterday, she refused to eat the perfectly good lunch I made her, threw it on the floor in a tantrum, and then later claimed she was hungry. I told her that children who waste food would have to wait for the next meal, but of course I would never give her anything spoiled. She must have found that bread somewhere and made up this story to get attention." It was masterfully done. Victoria had managed to paint Emma as a liar and herself as a reasonable disciplinarian, all while expressing concern and sorrow. If Alexander hadn't seen his daughter's physical condition with his own eyes, if he hadn't held the moldy bread in his hands, he might have believed her. "Where did you spend last night, Victoria?" The question caught her off guard, and for a moment her mask slipped. What do you mean?" "Your bed wasn't slept in. Emma was alone in the house all night, and you were somewhere else." "Where?" Victoria's laugh sounded forced. "Oh, that. Sarah Pemberton had too much wine at the dinner party, and I didn't want her driving home alone. I stayed over to make sure she was all right. You know how these charity ladies can be with their champagne. I didn't think you'd mind, since you weren't supposed to be home until Sunday." It was plausible enough, and Alexander had no doubt Victoria had prepared the story during her walk from car to kitchen. But he wasn't done. "Victoria, I think we need to have Emma examined by our family doctor. She looks severely underweight, and I want to make sure her health hasn't been affected by whatever's been going on here." "Of course." Victoria agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I've been concerned about her appetite myself. Children processing grief can develop eating disorders, and I've been trying so hard to encourage her to eat properly. A medical evaluation is exactly what we need. I'm sure Dr. Chen will be able to help us understand what Emma is going through psychologically." Alexander studied his wife's face, noting how effortlessly she had turned his concern into another opportunity to pathologize Emma's behavior. Victoria was either a master manipulator or completely delusional, and given the evidence he'd seen upstairs, He was betting on the former. "I'm going to take this breakfast up to Emma now," Alexander said, loading a tray with pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit, and orange juice. "She's probably hungry." "Oh, let me do that," Victoria offered, moving toward the tray. "You must be exhausted from traveling, and I know exactly how much Emma can handle. We don't want to overwhelm her system if she's been having eating issues." Alexander blocked Victoria's reach for the tray. "I'll handle it. I want to spend some time with my daughter." He paused at the kitchen doorway and turned back. "Victoria, I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay for the next few days. I need to focus on Emma right now, and I think having fewer people in the house might help her feel more secure." For the first time since entering the kitchen, Victoria's composure cracked completely. "Alexander, you can't be serious. This is my home too. I'm your wife, and that child needs consistent authority figures, not to be coddled every time she tells stories for attention. If you keep rewarding her manipulation..." "Victoria." Alexander's voice carried the same tone he used in boardrooms when negotiations were over. "Find somewhere else to stay. We'll talk more when I've had time to process everything." Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous before the mask slipped back into place. "Of course, darling. If that's what you think is best for Emma, I'll stay at my sister's for a few days. But Alexander, please don't let that child manipulate you with her stories. I've only ever tried to provide the structure and discipline she desperately needs. Isabella, God rest her soul, was perhaps too permissive, and Emma is still adjusting to having a mother who believes in boundaries." The casual criticism of Isabella, coupled with Victoria's continued insistence on calling herself Emma's mother, sent another wave of fury through Alexander, but he simply nodded and headed upstairs with the breakfast tray. He could hear Victoria making phone calls behind him, probably arranging her temporary housing and spinning the story to her advantage. The concerned stepmother being pushed out by a father who was too grief-stricken to see his daughter's manipulative behavior. Emma was still sitting on her mattress when Alexander returned, but she had pulled out a small photograph from beneath it, a picture of Alexander, Isabella, and baby Emma from one of their family vacations. She was staring at it with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "Look what Daddy brought you, sweetheart," Alexander said, setting the tray down on the floor beside the mattress. Emma's eyes went wide at the sight of real food: golden pancakes dripping with syrup, crispy bacon, bright red strawberries, and fresh orange juice in a real glass. But instead of diving in, Emma looked up at Alexander with confusion and fear. "Is this a test? Am I supposed to say I'm not hungry?" The question broke Alexander's heart all over again. His daughter had been so thoroughly conditioned to expect punishment that even this act of basic care seemed suspicious to her. "No, baby. No tests, no tricks. This food is for you because you're hungry and because I love you. You can eat as much or as little as you want." Emma reached out tentatively and touched one of the strawberries, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "What if Mommy Victoria comes back and gets angry that I ate her food?" "Victoria is going to stay somewhere else for a while," Alexander said carefully. "And this isn't her food. It's our food, yours and mine. You live here, Emma. This is your home, and you have every right to eat the food in your own home." Slowly, carefully, Emma picked up a piece of bacon and took a small bite. The taste seemed to overwhelm her, and tears began streaming down her face again. "It's so good, Daddy. I forgot food could taste like this." Alexander had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. His 7-year-old daughter was crying over bacon because she had forgotten what real food tasted like. The depth of Victoria's cruelty was almost incomprehensible, but the evidence was sitting right in front of him in the form of his malnourished, psychologically traumatized child. As Emma slowly worked her way through the breakfast, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "On my way. Have you documented any evidence? This could be a legal matter." Alexander discreetly took photos of Emma's room, her physical condition, and yes, the piece of moldy bread that had started this revelation. He also began recording a voice memo, documenting everything Emma had told him, everything he had observed, and Victoria's responses to his questions. If this became a custody battle, and Alexander was certain it would, he wanted an unshakable foundation of evidence. Emma had eaten about half the breakfast when she suddenly stopped, her hand pressed to her stomach. I think I'm full, Daddy. Is that okay? I don't want to waste your food." The fact that his daughter was apologizing for being full, worried about wasting food after months of starvation, made Alexander want to punch a hole through the wall. Instead, he smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Of course it's okay to be full, sweetheart. Your tummy probably isn't used to this much good food all at once. We'll save the rest for later." As if summoned by their conversation, the doorbell rang, followed by the sound of Dr. Chen's voice downstairs. Alexander had given her a key years ago for emergencies, and this certainly qualified. "Emma, remember Dr. Chen? She's here to make sure you're healthy and strong." Emma nodded, but Alexander could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. Doctor visits in the Victoria era had probably been fraught with anxiety, coached lies, and the constant threat of punishment if she said the wrong thing. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway carrying her medical bag, and her professional composure slipped for just a moment when she saw Emma's condition. At 45, Dr. Chen had been the Blackwood family physician for over a decade. She had delivered Emma, treated her childhood ailments, and watched her grow from a healthy, happy baby into a bright, energetic child. The pale, hollow-cheeked little girl sitting on the mattress bore only a passing resemblance to the Emma she remembered. "Hello, sweet girl," Dr. Chen said softly, sitting down cross-legged on the floor to put herself at Emma's eye level. "I heard you haven't been feeling your best lately. Can you tell me how your body feels?" Emma glanced at Alexander for permission before answering. "My tummy hurts a lot, and sometimes I feel dizzy when I stand up. And my head hurts sometimes, but Mommy Victoria said that's because I think too much about sad things." Dr. Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's take a look and see if we can figure out why you're not feeling well, okay?" She began her examination gently, checking Emma's weight, height, blood pressure, and heart rate. Alexander watched her face grow increasingly grim as the assessment continued. "Emma, can you show me your hands?" Dr. Chen asked. When Emma held out her small hands, Dr. Chen photographed the thin wrists, the prominent knuckles, the way Emma's fingers had begun to look skeletal. "How about we check your back and see how tall you've grown?" As Emma lifted her arms, Dr. Chen took more photographs documenting the visible ribs, the sharp shoulder blades, the way Emma's spine created a ridge beneath her thin skin. Each photo was also evidence, Alexander realized, building a case that would be impossible to explain away. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions about eating," Dr. Chen said, pulling out a small tablet. "It's very important that you tell me the truth, okay? No one is going to be angry with you for telling the truth." Over the next 20 minutes, Dr. Chen gently but thoroughly documented Emma's diet, her symptoms, her weight loss, and the timeline of her decline. Emma's answers painted a picture of systematic starvation disguised as discipline, with Victoria carefully calculating just how much food to withhold without causing immediate medical crisis. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Chen said, moving to the hallway where Emma couldn't hear them. "This child is severely malnourished and showing signs of psychological trauma consistent with prolonged abuse. Her weight has dropped nearly 25% from where it should be for her age and height. If this had continued much longer, we could have been looking at permanent organ damage or worse." Alexander felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. What do we do now? How do we fix this? Medically, we need to start with careful refeeding. Her digestive system needs to readjust gradually to proper nutrition. Psychologically, she's going to need therapy to process what she's been through. And legally. Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "Alexander, this level of neglect and psychological abuse is criminal. I'm mandated to report this to Child Protective Services." "Do what you need to do," Alexander said without hesitation. "Emma's safety is the only thing that matters now." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "I'm going to document everything and send copies to both CPS and your attorney. In the meantime, keep feeding her small amounts frequently and watch for any signs of refeeding syndrome, nausea, dizziness, irregular heartbeat. If anything seems wrong, call me immediately." As Dr. Chen packed up her equipment, Alexander's phone rang. The caller ID showed his private investigator, David Kim. "I've got preliminary findings." David's voice was grim. "Victoria Ashford has quite a history. 2 previous marriages, both husbands died under suspicious circumstances, both left her everything. There's also evidence of a restraining order filed by her first husband's daughter, claims of abuse and manipulation that sound remarkably similar to what you've described." Alexander stepped further away from Emma's room. "How did my background check miss all of this?" "She's good at covering her tracks. Changes her name slightly each time, uses different states, waits long enough between marriages for records to get buried. I'm digging deeper, but Alexander, this woman is a professional. Emma wasn't her first victim, and if you hadn't come home early, she probably wouldn't have been her last. The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't married him for love or even just for money. She had married him to systematically destroy his daughter and claim his fortune. Emma had been living with a predator who had perfected her methods over years of practice. I need everything you can find, Alexander said. Every record, every connection, every pattern. And David, I need it fast. I have a feeling Victoria isn't going to go quietly. After ending the call, Alexander returned to Emma's room to find her curled up on the mattress, still clutching the photograph of their family. The morning's revelations had exhausted her, and she was fighting to keep her eyes open. Daddy. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Are you going to send me away now that you know how bad I've been? Alexander gathered his daughter into his arms, feeling her fragile body trembling against his chest. Emma, listen to me very carefully. You have not been bad. Not one single day. Not for one single minute. You have been the bravest, strongest little girl in the world, and I am so proud of you for surviving what you've been through. But I lied to you, Emma whispered. When you would call from your trips and ask if I was eating well, I said yes. Mommy Victoria said I had to lie or you wouldn't love me anymore. Fresh anger surged through Alexander at Victoria's manipulation, but he kept his voice gentle. You didn't lie, sweetheart. You were protecting yourself, which is exactly what you should do when someone threatens you. Smart, brave girls find ways to survive, and that's exactly what you did. Emma pulled back to look at him, searching his face for signs of deception. Do you promise you won't leave me with her again? I promise, Alexander said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Victoria will never be alone with you again. In fact, I don't think she'll be coming back to this house at all. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway, followed by the sharp clicking of heels on the front walkway. Alexander's jaw clenched as he recognized the purposeful stride of someone preparing for battle. Victoria burst through the front door without bothering to use her key, her voice carrying up the stairs with artificial brightness. Alexander, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I believe we need to discuss Emma's condition with some professionals. I've arranged for Dr. Whitmore, you remember him, the child psychiatrist, to evaluate Emma this afternoon. Children who fabricate stories about abuse often need intensive intervention. Alexander settled Emma back onto her mattress and kissed her forehead. Stay here, sweetheart. Daddy needs to talk to Victoria, but I want you to know that nothing she says is going to change anything. You're safe now. Emma nodded, but Alexander could see the fear returning to her eyes as Victoria's voice grew louder downstairs. Months of conditioning couldn't be erased in a single morning, and Emma still associated Victoria's presence with danger and punishment. Alexander descended the stairs to find Victoria in the living room, perfectly dressed and made up, standing beside an elderly man in her expensive suit. She had clearly not wasted any time assembling her counterattack. Alexander, this is Dr. Richard Whitmore, Victoria said with a brilliant smile. He's a renowned child psychiatrist who specializes in cases where children develop fantasy narratives as coping mechanisms for grief. I thought it would be helpful to get his professional opinion on Emma's recent storytelling. Dr. Whitmore extended his hand, and Alexander noted the man's firm grip and assessing gaze. Mr. Blackwood, your wife has explained the situation. Children who lose a parent at a young age often struggle with accepting new authority figures, and sometimes they create elaborate fantasies to regain a sense of control. The good news is that with proper intervention, we can help Emma understand the difference between reality and wishful thinking. The casual dismissal of Emma's suffering as wishful thinking made Alexander's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. Dr. Whitmore, have you examined Emma yet? Have you seen any evidence of these supposed fantasies? Well, no, but Mrs. Blackwood has provided me with detailed accounts of Emma's behavior patterns, and they're quite consistent with what we see in cases of parental alienation syndrome. Children will often claim abuse that isn't occurring in order to manipulate situations to their advantage. Alexander realized he was looking at Victoria's endgame. She had found a psychiatrist willing to pathologize Emma's truthful account of abuse, probably someone who owed her a favor or could be bought. If she could get Emma diagnosed with a psychological disorder that made her an unreliable witness, Victoria could discredit everything the child said while positioning herself as the victim of a disturbed child's fantasies. "Dr. Whitmore," Alexander said carefully, "would you be interested in seeing some actual evidence before you make your diagnosis?" Victoria's smile flickered for just a moment. "Alexander, darling, I don't think traumatizing Emma further by rehashing her fantasies is." "I'm not talking about Emma's testimony," Alexander interrupted. "I'm talking about physical evidence, medical documentation, photographs. Would you like to see those, Doctor?" Dr. Whitmore looked uncertain for the first time. Physical evidence of what, exactly? Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Dr. Whitmore the photographs he'd taken that morning. Emma's emaciated body, her bare room stripped of all comfort, and the piece of moldy bread that had started this revelation. "This is what my daughter was eating for breakfast when I came home, Doctor. Our family physician has documented severe malnutrition and psychological trauma. What's your professional opinion on that?" The color drained from Dr. Whitmore's face as he scrolled through the images. "Mr. Blackwood, this isn't what Mrs. Blackwood described. She told me Emma was refusing to eat and throwing tantrums about food, not that she was actually malnourished." Victoria stepped forward quickly, her voice taking on a slight edge beneath the sweetness. "Alexander, you know how children can be. Emma probably hid that bread to make herself look like a victim when you came home. She's been manipulating situations like this for months, creating evidence to support her fantasies. Dr. Whitmore, surely you can see the pattern here." But Dr. Whitmore was studying the photographs more carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Blackwood, this level of weight loss doesn't happen overnight. These photos suggest chronic malnutrition over an extended period. That's not something a child can fake or manipulate." Alexander could see Victoria's carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble, and he pressed his advantage. "Dr. Whitmore, I appreciate you coming, but I think it's clear that Emma needs medical intervention, not psychiatric evaluation. Our family physician is handling her care, and I'm confident she'll make a full recovery now that the situation has been addressed." Dr. Whitmore closed Alexander's phone and handed it back, his professional demeanor clearly shaken. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about your daughter's condition. Based on what I've seen here, I would recommend focusing on her physical rehabilitation and perhaps some gentle trauma counseling once she's medically stable." Victoria's mask was beginning to slip in earnest now. "Dr. Whitmore, surely you can see that Alexander is being manipulated by a troubled child. Emma has been difficult and defiant ever since I tried to provide some structure in this household. I've only ever tried to help her adjust to having boundaries again after being spoiled by her biological mother." The casual insult to Isabella was the final straw for Alexander's composure. "Victoria, I want you out of this house. Now, take whatever you need for the next few days, but I want you gone in the next hour." "Alexander, you can't be serious." Victoria's voice rose, and for the first time, her true personality began showing through the cracks. "I'm your wife. This is my home too. You can't throw me out because some disturbed child has convinced you." "The only disturbed person in this house is you," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "Dear Whitmore, thank you for your time, but this consultation is over." Dr. Whitmore gathered his briefcase quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Mr. Blackwood, if you need any recommendations for qualified trauma therapists who work with children, please don't hesitate to call my office." As Dr. Whitmore left, Victoria dropped her pretense entirely. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Alexander. That child is manipulative and disturbed, just like her mother was. Isabella filled Emma's head with fantasies about being a perfect little princess, and now she can't handle the real world. I was trying to prepare her for reality, to teach her that life has consequences and structure. But instead of thanking me for providing the discipline Isabella never could, you're going to destroy our marriage over a child's lies." The venom in Victoria's voice as she spoke about Isabella and Emma revealed the depth of her hatred and jealousy. Alexander realized that Victoria hadn't just married him for money. She had actively resented his love for his first wife and daughter, seeing them as obstacles to be removed rather than family members to be cherished. "Victoria, you have 1 hour to pack whatever you need," Alexander repeated. "After that, you can communicate with me through lawyers." Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Fine. But Alexander, when that child's psychological problems become too much for you to handle alone, when her lies and manipulation drive you to your breaking point, Remember that I offered to help. Don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you've given up." With that threat hanging in the air, Victoria stormed upstairs to gather her belongings. Alexander could hear drawers slamming and heels clicking angrily across the hardwood floors, but he felt nothing but relief. The predator who had been systematically destroying his daughter was finally being driven from their home. Alexander climbed the stairs to check on Emma, finding her curled up on her mattress with her hands pressed over her ears, trying to block out the sounds of Victoria's angry packing. Her thin shoulders were shaking with suppressed sobs. "Is she going to take me with her?" Emma whispered without looking up. "She said if you ever found out about the bread, she would make sure I got sent away where you could never find me." Alexander gathered Emma into his arms, holding her close as Victoria's threats echoed through the house. "No one is taking you anywhere, sweetheart. You're my daughter, and you're staying right here with me." 20 minutes later, Victoria appeared in Emma's doorway carrying 2 large suitcases. She had changed into traveling clothes, but her makeup was perfect and her hair was still styled flawlessly. Even in defeat, she maintained the appearance of control. "Well, Emma," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I hope you're happy. You've managed to turn your father against the only mother you have left. But don't worry, darling. When he realizes what a burden you really are, when your lies catch up with you, I'll still be here. After all, someone has to take care of damaged little girls." "That's enough." Alexander stepped between Victoria and Emma, his voice carrying all the authority he'd learned in decades of business negotiations. "Get out. Now." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade as she looked past Alexander to Emma cowering on their mattress. "Goodbye, stepdaughter. I do hope you remember our little talks about what happens to children who tell stories. Some lessons last a lifetime." With that final psychological assault, Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking decisively across the marble floors. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows, followed by the sound of her car engine roaring to life and tires squealing against asphalt. The house fell silent for the first time in months, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of fear, it was the quiet of safety finally restored. Alexander looked down at Emma, who was staring at the empty doorway as if she couldn't quite believe Victoria was really gone. "Is she really not coming back?" Emma asked in a voice so small Alexander had to strain to hear it. "Really and truly," Alexander confirmed. "It's just you and me now, sweetheart. The way it should have been all along." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then, slowly, she began to cry, not the silent, terrified tears she'd been shedding for months, but the loud, messy sobs of a child who finally felt safe enough to express her pain. Alexander held his daughter while she cried out months of suppressed fear, hunger, and loneliness. He cried too, grieving for the time he'd lost, the suffering he'd failed to prevent, and the innocence that Victoria had stolen from his little girl. But underneath the grief was something stronger, the fierce determination of a father who would never again allow anyone to hurt his child. Over the following days, Alexander began the careful process of rebuilding his daughter's life and his relationship with her. Emma's recovery was slow and often painful, marked by setbacks and breakthrough moments in equal measure. She would sometimes hoard food under her mattress, unable to believe that meals would continue to appear regularly. She would flinch when Alexander moved too quickly or spoke too loudly, her nervous system still calibrated to expect punishment and pain. But there were victories too. The first time Emma asked for seconds at dinner, tears of joy streamed down Alexander's face. When she laughed at a silly joke he made, really laughed, not the polite, fearful response Victoria had trained into her, Alexander felt like his heart might burst with relief and love. Dr. Chen monitored Emma's physical recovery closely, tracking her gradual weight gain and the return of color to her pale cheeks. She also recommended a trauma therapist, Dr. Amanda Foster, who specialized in helping young children process abuse and neglect. Dr. Foster was patient and gentle, using art therapy and play techniques to help Emma express feelings she didn't yet have words for. Alexander also threw himself into learning how to be the father Emma needed. He read books about trauma recovery, attended parenting workshops, and completely restructured his work schedule to prioritize his daughter's needs. The global business empire that had once consumed his every waking hour became secondary to helping Emma heal. 3 weeks after Victoria's departure, Emma's bedroom was transformed back into a child sanctuary. Alexander had secretly saved all of Isabella's decorations in storage, and together he and Emma recreated the princess room that Victoria had stripped away. They hung fairy lights and set up the dollhouse, arranged the stuffed animals on shelves, and placed Isabella's photograph in a place of honor on the nightstand. "Mommy would be happy that we are together again," Emma said one evening as Alexander tucked her into her restored canopy bed. "I used to talk to her picture when I was scared, and I think she was trying to help you find me." Alexander kissed his daughter's forehead, marveling at her resilience and wisdom. "I think you're right, sweetheart. Mommy loved you so much, and she would be very proud of how brave you've been." Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Alexander with serious eyes. "Daddy, what if Mommy Victoria comes back? What if she tries to hurt me again?" It was a fear Emma expressed regularly, despite Alexander's repeated assurances. Victoria's psychological manipulation had been so thorough that Emma struggled to believe she was truly safe. "Emma, remember what we talked about? Victoria can never live in our house again. I've made sure of that legally. And if she ever tries to bother you, there are police officers and lawyers and judges whose job it is to protect children like you. Promise." Emma whispered. "I promise," Alexander said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. But even as he comforted his daughter, Alexander knew that Victoria wasn't the type to simply disappear quietly into the night. His private investigator had uncovered disturbing patterns in her past, and women like Victoria didn't abandon potential fortunes without a fight. His instincts proved correct 2 weeks later when Rebecca Martinez, his attorney, called with troubling news. "Alexander, Victoria has filed a countersuit claiming you're an unfit parent who's been brainwashed by a disturbed child. She's alleging that Emma has severe psychological problems and that you're enabling her fantasies instead of getting her proper treatment. She wants joint custody and her marital rights restored." Alexander felt cold fury wash over him. "She's going to try to get Emma back." "She's going to try," Rebecca confirmed. "But Alexander, we have documentation, medical records, and evidence that will be very difficult for her to explain away. Still, I want you to be prepared for a fight. Victoria has hired Marcus Webb. He's a ruthless divorce attorney who specializes in high net worth cases. He'll try to twist the narrative to make Victoria look like a victim." That evening, Alexander sat Emma down for a conversation he'd been dreading. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you about something that might happen. Victoria's lawyers might want to ask you some questions about what happened when she lived here." Emma's eyes went wide with terror. "Do I have to see her again? Do I have to go back to her?" "No, baby. You never have to be alone with Victoria again, I promise. But there might be times when you need to tell nice adults, like judges or social workers, about what happened so they can understand why Victoria can't live with us anymore." Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander could see her processing this information with the seriousness of a much older child. "Will you be there when I have to talk to them?" "Every single time," Alexander assured her. "And if you ever feel scared or don't want to answer a question, you can tell me and we'll stop." Emma nodded solemnly. "Daddy, I don't want to lie anymore. I want to tell the truth about what she did, even if it's scary." Alexander gathered his brave little girl into his arms, overwhelmed by her courage and determination. "That's my girl. The truth isn't always easy, but it's always right." Over the following weeks, Alexander and Emma prepared for the legal battle ahead. They met with child advocates, social workers, and court-appointed guardians who would help ensure Emma's voice was heard in the proceedings. Each interview was difficult for Emma, requiring her to relive traumatic experiences, but she faced each one with growing confidence. The turning point came when David Kim, the private investigator, uncovered Victoria's most damning secret. "Alexander, I found her. Victoria's first stepdaughter, Jennifer Morrison. She's 23 now, and she's willing to testify about what Victoria did to her when she was Emma's age." Jennifer Morrison had survived an ordeal remarkably similar to Emma's: systematic psychological abuse, controlled starvation disguised as discipline, and elaborate gaslighting designed to make her appear unstable. But Jennifer had been older when her father remarried, and when she tried to tell him what was happening, Victoria had successfully convinced him that his daughter was lying out of jealousy. "It went on for 4 years, Jennifer told Alexander during a video call that left him shaking with rage. "She broke me down completely, made me believe I was crazy and worthless. When my father finally divorced her, it wasn't because he believed me. It was because she got greedy and he caught her trying to steal from his business accounts. But by then the damage was done. I spent years in therapy trying to undo what she did to my mind." Jennifer's testimony, combined with the medical evidence and Emma's own account, created an unshakable case against Victoria. When the custody hearing finally took place, Victoria's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of documented evidence and multiple witness testimonies. Alexander watched from the gallery as Victoria sat at the defendant's table, still perfectly dressed and made up, still playing the role of the grieving stepmother who had been betrayed by an ungrateful family. But this time, her performance fell flat. The judge, the Honourable Margaret Chen, no relation to their family doctor, had seen too many cases of child abuse to be fooled by surface appearances. Emma testified via closed-circuit television, with Alexander and Dr. Foster by her side for support. Her voice was clear and steady as she answered questions about the moldy bread, the bare room, the psychological torture disguised as discipline. She spoke about her hunger, her fear, and her relief when her father finally came home and saw the truth. The defendant systematically abused and neglected a vulnerable child, Judge Chen stated when delivering her verdict. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior designed to psychologically and physically harm the victim while maintaining plausible deniability. This court finds that Victoria Ashford Blackwood is an unfit parent figure who poses a direct threat to the child's well-being. Victoria's parental rights were permanently terminated, and she was barred from any contact with Emma. Additionally, the evidence uncovered during the custody proceedings led to criminal charges for child abuse, neglect, and fraud. The woman who had entered their lives as a predator was finally being held accountable for her crimes. As they left the courthouse, Emma slipped her small hand into Alexander's. "Is it really over, Daddy? Is she really never coming back?" "It's really over, sweetheart," Alexander confirmed. "Victoria can never hurt you again." Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with something Alexander hadn't seen in months: hope. "Can we go home and have pancakes for dinner? They're kind with strawberries that Mommy Isabella used to make." Alexander's throat tightened with emotion, but his voice was steady when he replied, "We can have pancakes whenever you want them, baby girl. For the rest of your life, you never have to be hungry again." 6 months later, Emma's laughter echoed through the halls of the Blackwood mansion for the first time since Isabella's death. She had gained back the weight she'd lost, her cheeks were round and pink again, and her blue eyes sparkled with life. She was enrolled in a new school where teachers describe her as bright, creative, and remarkably resilient for such a young child. Alexander had also transformed. The workaholic businessman who had once spent more time in conference rooms than with his daughter had become a hands-on father who knew Emma's favorite bedtime stories by heart and never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. He had learned to braid her hair, paint her nails, and listen with infinite patience as she told him about her day. Emma still saw Dr. Foster weekly, working through the lingering effects of her trauma. Some nights she still had bad dreams, and there was still food she couldn't eat without remembering the hunger Victoria had used as a weapon. But these episodes were becoming rarer, replaced by the normal joys and concerns of a healthy 7-year-old. On a warm Sunday morning, Alexander found Emma in the garden behind their house, talking quietly to a small memorial stone they had placed there in Isabella's honor. Fresh flowers surrounded the stone, and Emma had arranged them with the same care her mother had once shown in her garden. "What are you telling Mommy?" Alexander asked, sitting down beside his daughter in the soft grass. "I'm telling her about school, and about how we made cookies yesterday, and about how you read me 3 stories last night instead of just 1, Emma said with a smile. "And I'm telling her that I'm not scared anymore, and that I know she's proud of us for taking care of each other." Alexander wrapped his arm around Emma, pulling her close as they sat together in the peaceful garden. "I think Mommy is very proud of you, sweetheart. You're the bravest little girl in the world." Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, content and secure in a way that had once seemed impossible. "Daddy, do you think there are other little girls like me? Ones who are scared and hungry and don't know how to ask for help?" The question surprised Alexander with its maturity and compassion. Even after everything she had endured, Emma's first thought was for other children who might be suffering as she had suffered. "I think there might be," Alexander said carefully. "Why do you ask?" Emma was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I was thinking that maybe, when I'm older, I could help them. Like how Dr. Foster helped me, or how you saved me when you came home early. Maybe I could tell them that it gets better, and that there are people who will believe them and keep them safe." Alexander felt his heart swell with pride and love for his remarkable daughter. Despite the trauma she had endured, Emma had emerged with her capacity for empathy and compassion not just intact, but strengthened. She wanted to use her pain to help others, to transform her suffering into healing. I think that would be a wonderful way to honor what you've been through, Alexander said. And when you're ready, I'll help you do exactly that. Emma smiled and picked up one of the flowers, twirling it between her fingers. Mommy Isabella always said that flowers grow best after the hardest winters. I think I understand what she meant now. As father and daughter sat together in the garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed brighter because they had survived the darkness, Alexander knew that their story had found its true ending. Not in the courthouse where justice had been served, or in the moment Victoria had been removed from their lives, but here in this quiet moment of love and hope and healing. Emma was no longer the frightened, starving child he had found eating moldy bread on a bare mattress. She was a survivor, a warrior, a little girl who had faced the worst that life could offer and emerged stronger, kinder, and more determined to make the world a better place. And Victoria. She would spend the next several years in prison, where her beauty and manipulation skills would prove far less effective than they had in the outside world. Justice had been served, not through revenge or cruelty, but through truth, evidence, and the unwavering love of a father who had finally learned to put his daughter first. The story closes not with the dramatic courtroom scenes or Victoria's downfall, but with the simple, profound image of a father and daughter healing together, their love for each other stronger than any force that had tried to tear them apart. Because in the end, that's what these stories are really about: the triumph of love over evil, hope over despair, and the unbreakable bonds between people who choose to stand together against the darkness. Emma looked up at her father with eyes bright with joy and possibility. I love you, Daddy. And I'm never letting go again. I love you too, sweetheart, Alexander replied, holding his daughter close as the sun warmed. Their faces and Isabella's flowers bloomed around them. And I'm never letting go again either. In that moment, surrounded by love and light and the promise of better tomorrows, they were no longer victims of Victoria's cruelty. They were survivors who had found their way back to each other, stronger and more grateful for every ordinary moment of happiness they would share for the rest of their lives. What do you think about Emma's journey from fear to courage? Which moment touched you most deeply? The moldy bread discovery, the courtroom testimony, or the garden conversation about helping other children? How are you doing today? If this story brought you comfort or hope, please share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible. Leave a comment about your thoughts, and remember, if you or someone you know needs help, there are people who will believe you and stand with you. Thank you for listening to this story of justice, healing, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest circumstances. Subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us good people are rewarded and the truth always finds a way to shine through.